Orleans Humanist Perspective, presented by the New Orleans Secular Humanist Association, following a few principles of humanism.
We're committed to the use of science and reason for understanding the universe and for solving human problems. We're skeptical of untested claims of knowledge, but we're open to new ideas.
We are concerned with securing justice and fairness in society and in ending intolerance and discrimination. We are committed to the total separation of religion and government.
We affirm humanism as a realistic alternative to the theologies of despair and the ideologies of violence. We reject the concept of an afterlife and believe in living a full and rewarding life here and now.
We value and respect each individual's right to judge and lead their lives according to their own position, as long as it's respectful of other people, living in a free society.
We hope you enjoy today's program and others in the weeks to follow.
Welcome to the Humanist Perspective. My name is Jeffrey Bright, and my guest is Scott Eustace.
Yeah. Hey.
He's with the Gulf Restoration Network. And we're going to be talking about a bunch of different issues in Louisiana, and Scott's going to help us through it. One of the issues that I'm I guess we should introduce you first and your organization. So tell us about the Gulf Restoration Network.
Well, the Gulf Restoration Network is a 24-year-old nonprofit environmental advocacy organization, and we use science-based advocacy to protect our water, our wetlands, and sustainable fisheries in the Gulf of Mexico. We have members across all 5 of the northern Gulf of Mexico states. So it's not just Louisiana, although I'm born and raised in New Orleans, so I'm partial to this state and everything that goes on in it.
Well, we appreciate your work. Excellent. So you, just a little bit about you. You have like a master's degree in UNO. I looked on your bio on the website.
Oh, yeah. Environmental science.
It's environmental science? And,
yeah.
A master's and a bachelor in ecology, right?
From the University of Georgia.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a good school.
Excellent. And I also see that you have you fly kites for the Public Lab. What is? I was reading your bio and I didn't understand what that was. So.
Well, Public Lab is another nonprofit, which I'm a volunteer organizer for that organization. But they engineer low-cost environmental monitoring tools. There's a lot of environmental claims that go untested, right?
Oh, yes.
If we want to be in the business of testing those claims, sometimes it costs a lot of money to hire a lab to have some special equipment, to pay someone hourly for who's very specialized labor.
Right.
But the communities that are most affected by pollution often don't have those kinds of resources. So Public Lab is a group that engineers low-cost environmental sensing technology
using kites.
That advocates can take to court. So instead of drones, we get the kites. Right?
Okay.
Also, it's I've flew kites behind the tailpipe of a number of different industrial plants, looking at what they pollute. They are given permits to pollute a certain amount. They're often over. They often have unplanned pollution events, and with a kite, you can very simple technology, very old technology. You can put one of your old little point and shoots that's been sitting in a drawer. You can just put that up in a kite and catch somebody violating the Clean Water Act, and you can make them clean up their mess that way. So we've had some success, using those low-cost technologies. And it's fun, too, the kites.
Definitely. Sounds great. It sounds great.
It's a lot less.
Take me on one of those.
Oh, yeah. I'll be down in Oakville this month. We'll be looking at some... they have a landfill right next to them that's encroaching on too close. So we're going to take some survey pictures. And we could, there are professionals who are trained, and I fly drones sometimes too, right? And there's professionals you can hire to fly the drones to do the big survey. Right. But for a lot of things, you don't need that super technical, super specific, super refined data. You just need a picture of hey, here's this problem. If you just need that kind of obvious picture, the kite does great.
That's perfect. Well, the reason I wanted to invite you on was to talk about the Bayou Bridge pipeline, because I know that's a big issue here in Louisiana and probably for the world, really, if you talk about global warming. But so tell us what the Bayou Bridge pipeline is.
Well, I think it's a 160-mile crude oil pipeline from Nederland, Texas, just across the border, north of Port Arthur, to Lake Charles, and then from Lake Charles to St. James, the St. James community on the west bank of St. James Parish on the Mississippi River. Right. And it's a big east-west pipeline cutting across the southern half of the state. So, and
that's being built, right? It's not.
It's under construction. Right. We had it's also connected to the Dakota Access Pipeline,
right? Which probably a lot more people have heard of, right?
So. It's that same crude oil coming from the fracked oil fields of the Bakken Shale in North Dakota. Right. So, and just as that struggle in North Dakota involved, and South Dakota involved an injustice that the Army Corps of Engineers moved the pipeline away from the white people onto the Sioux land.
Right.
And then didn't tell them about it, didn't consult with them about it.
Surprise.
Yeah, this pipeline also goes through our native communities in Louisiana, most of which are not federally recognized, so they don't even have the same standing that the Sioux tribe does, because the Sioux tribe is recognized by the U.S. federal government.
I see.
Whereas a lot of our Native American populations in the state don't have that authority to say, oh no, here's these are the conditions.
Land, right.
Yeah, you can't go through here.
Right.
So the Houma Nation, the Pointe-Noire tribe, the Grand Bayou people,
right.
different bands of Atakapa. There's a lot of people that are their bands or tribes. They might even be recognized by the state of Louisiana, but they're not recognized by the federal government. So I mean, and a lot of those native folks affected by this pipeline are in Lake Charles. You may have heard of Bayou Din. Bayou Din. It's Bayou de Ind, right? It's like Bayou of the Indian.
I see.
And that's one of the most polluted bayous in the entire state in Lake Charles in a Native American community.
Right.
So there has been a resistance movement. Loy Levy Camp has prevented the construction of the pipeline on their land, just a little bit.
Right.
Because in Louisiana we're small but fierce.
That's exactly right.
And you should check that out on Facebook or however you Loy Levy, Water is Life, right? In French.
Right.
But as a network we strive to unite all of these groups, the Native groups, African American groups, community groups, justice groups, all have different concerns to protect our natural resources. And I think for this pipeline, we've been focused on the impacts to the Atchafalaya Basin, because that is
you were
one of the Earth's treasures,
you were telling me about
and then
that,
the injustice in St. James. Those are our two focuses for this.
So about the basin that so you were talking about that they currently use that, they already use that as a floodplain, is that right, or an over?
Yeah,
tell me,
right. The Atchafalaya Basin, it's almost 1 million acres of prehistoric swamp, and it's the last bit left of an ecosystem that used to extend in the inland sea of the United States all the way to Illinois.
Oh, wow.
And we have this treasure here in Louisiana.
And we're determined to destroy it.
Right. The Army Corps the Army Corps uses it as a floodway, kind of like the Bonnie Carey spillway. When the Mississippi River gets too high, puts too much pressure on the New Orleans levees, they open it up and allow that water to flood into the basin. But the way they've levied it and confined it into a smaller space. Right. And when they send water down it, that water has a lot of sediment spread into a smaller area. So the Corps is filling in the basin over time, over hundreds of years, with their bad practices. And then these pipelines, not just the Bayou Bridge pipeline, but Enterprise, Shell, lots of different pipeline companies, they want to go from the refinery complexes in Baton Rouge west to Lake Charles, Port Arthur, and Houston, right? So connecting the United States' refining infrastructure. Because they want to be able to trade that oil. Like, you know, it's like
if it's better overseas, send it overseas. If it's better,
now the ban is lifted now too. So if they can sell it overseas, they'll sell it there. It's kind of like, you know, the people on Wall Street. They want to get that office right next to the computers doing the trading. The pipeline network kind of enables companies to do the same thing. They can sell crude oil wherever. So there's no. There's some untested claims. You know, all these companies will wave the flag and say there's a national security interest in the construction of this infrastructure, and we have to take away your farm. We have to, go through your land. We have to disregard the Atchafalaya Basin, even though it's this ecological treasure. It still produces wild crawfish. In amazing amounts. It's a critical component of what's called the Mississippi Flyway. All the migrating birds coming from South America up into Canada.
So, what kind of impact would this have on the environment? The pipeline, if they were successful?
Well, our litigation. We were just trying to stop all construction in the basin because it's an irreplaceable treasure. It's filling in. It's degrading. We have a restoration program to fix it from these pipelines and the sediment that comes with them. But like many of our restoration plans in Louisiana, it's unfunded.
It's a paper plan.
So there's a paper plan to fix the damages from all the old pipelines. So we were saying, hey, before you build a new one, you got to build it differently. You know, you can't do it the same way. Because we're behind on repairing all the old things.
Well, is there a way to build it that would be undamaging to the environment?
For the basin, it would be drilling underneath.
Okay.
So they call it horizontal drilling. So this is a 2-foot pipeline. It's rather large. It's not that 3-foot drill that you think of traditional oil well.
Okay.
But the long and the short of it is just more expensive for the company to do that. So they don't want to. For the basin, the harm is to these cypress trees. These cypress trees. Now, there was a lot of logging in the basin 150 years ago. Many trees were logged. Some of them weren't. So we have trees that are 200 years old. There's a lot of cypress trees 200 years old, and a lot of cypress trees that are thousands of years old. They're so large. If a tree is, this big, and it's in the basin, and often if you see a tree that big in the basin, it's deformed, The loggers probably passed it by because it was crowned, it wasn't good wood, maybe it was hollow. But that hollow tree is bear habitat. So chipping the trees, like with the instrument on the screen, some of the biggest impact is just chipping 200-year-old trees. And that machine can eat one of these trees in a matter of minutes. So in a matter of minutes, what took nature 200 years to grow it's
gone.
It's exploded into a thing of chips. All that yellow on the screen is just chipped cypress chips. And that was that's a travesty. Just because it's very hard to cultivate that kind of environment. Those trees supported migrating birds. The trees they shelter the Louisiana black bear. Those swamps, the trees keep the water cool so more fish can live in the swamps. Just treating the ecosystem like it's just in the way, we end up with much less value, and it actually is economically harmful to the crawfish fishermen that are trying to make their living. What's more, and the trees are one thing, and we did. In our first time in court, Judge Dick did agree with us that the value of the trees was irreplaceable. And so the construction must cease. But unfortunately,
I've read about that.
Unfortunately, we lost on appeal.
Oh, is that what happened?
But you should read her decision because it's an amazing decision that's very well considered. It's full of arguments of law and arguments of fact that I think are very educational. It's just that the appeals court didn't agree.
Well, that's a shame. So we have an impact on the local environment and potentially like a very old ecosystem, right? And then there's the impact of on Native communities as they go through, and then it lands in St. James Parish in a primarily African American community, right?
Almost over 95%.
Right.
As African American.
So what's the
folks.
impact of where it's going to be landing at? What's the impact there?
Well, that area of St. James Parish, it's the West Bank,
Right.
it's District 5. It has been, there was one oil terminal, pipeline terminal there for a long time, the Loop Terminal. It's pulling oil from Port Fourchon and Lafourche Parish up there. So they had one. And then, 20, 30 years ago, it started multiplying. Then there was Marathon and Exxon and Shell and bump. And I think there's about 14 now, all around these very small African-American towns that have been there since 1865. Some of them were Freedmen's Bureau towns. There were just a couple of roads. In the 60s, that was, people were moving there because maybe they make a little money, maybe they work at a plant. That was a little piece of paradise for a lot of black Louisianians, right? It was a nice, quiet place. There were schools. But over time, it's just not that way. There's so many pipelines going into this place that they have 2 major incidents a year, according to PHMSA, which is the Pipeline Health and Safety Administration,
right?
I think.
So 2 incidences. What would entail an incident?
Well, just last May there was a spill of about 14,000 gallons of crude oil out of one of those tanks into the ditches and into the drainage system behind.
Which no one wants to be near, right?
No one wants to be near that. Now, this is an old sugar plantation. The drainage has never really been improved. In New Orleans, we don't really have these drainage ditches. Across a lot of the state, right, drainage is a big issue, right? It's a big thing. You're always arguing about how much taxes should be raised to make the ditches bigger, right? These ditches are very meager because there's not been any kind of substantial development in this, since it was a sugar plantation. So not only does that come a problem when it rains really hard, like last year New Orleans had those floods in July and August, and that same August flooded these folks in Freetown in St. James, Burton Lane, I should say, is the name of a specific community. But because they share a drainage network with these oil terminals that the Bayou Ridge Pipeline would plug into and also encourage the development of more, there's oil in their ditches. So not only does the water not drain, when it backfloods them, there's contaminants.
So they didn't. So the incident, they don't clean that up at all.
They do. But if you know about oil cleanup, you get about 10% of it, right? There is a response. But once the oil is released into the environment, it's very hard to get out. Folks are also living. There's a lot of air pollution next to these oil storage during the hot summer months. Right about now, there's more vapor pressure inside the tank, and it's vented. And so you don't want to be living next to too many of these things. Unfortunately, there are communities like Burton Lane that are just completely surrounded. So, people, although this place was a piece of paradise in the 1960s, I think people were ready to leave. But you can imagine the value of their properties is not very high.
Yeah, it's not what it used to be, I'm sure. So
they're stuck. And they're stuck breathing bad things. And it's not just the oil terminals, so that's a big thing in St. James. You have CF Industries, a big ammonia plant just up the way. You've got the Marathon refinery to the east, a little ways away, but still that can affect the air quality. And then there's a new proposal for a plastics plant, which would not improve the situation either. Because the new fad is methanol and exporting plastics to maybe China. I don't know if they know, but we want to build these things in Louisiana. the companies want to come and use the resources of the Mississippi River.
Right.
And so often that river, that's where our historic African American towns are.
Right.
And so you end up with these environmental unjust situations. And I think in St. James, we've sued the Army Corps for issuing a permit to the pipeline.
Right.
And when they did not consider the Atchafalaya Basin and the ancient trees there and all the problems that the pipelines caused to the craw fishermen, we sued the state of Louisiana because they did not consider St. James at all.
Yeah, not part of the plan.
Not part of the plan. We did have a limited victory where the judge agreed that the state has to develop an evacuation plan.
Right.
And they have these incidences a couple of year, there have to be resources so that folks, maybe there's folks who are mobility limited, right?
Right.
Get some chairs, get some lift vans in there, get people out of the danger zone.
I've heard that there was an emergency evacuation road, right, that was owned by the one of the oil industries, and they now blocked that, right?
It was a parish road up until very recently.
Right.
And the parish did sell it to Capline, one of the oil storage companies, and Capline put a big gate across it and said you can't use it.
So that
was the only road to 3127, which was
Right.
the back 2-lane.
Right.
You have the river road in that part of the world.
Exactly.
And you have the back highway, right? And that's your only two. The Department of Transportation, the standard for all of our little linear communities in Louisiana, it's the back highway. That's the evacuation route.
Right.
And so if there's an incident at the Marathon storage, they shut down the river road.
Right.
You can't pass. So if you can't pass on the river road, and you can't get out the back to the highway.
Right, you're sheltering in place.
You shelter in place, which is a euphemism that is, you never want to hear that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's basically good luck, right?
Good luck. Just sit there and breathe it.
So is this legal for them to do that?
Apparently not.
So
apparently the judge did find that the Louisiana Department of Natural Resources issued their permit illegally because they illegally failed. Well, let's see. They failed to consider St. James and their need to evacuate.
Right.
From
their clear need to evacuate. Right?
Yes.
From 2 instances a year.
Yeah,
probably.
and unfortunately, this is a part of the world that I think is just uninhabitable for human beings with all of the pollution. So I mean, they're looking for a way out in that short term, but also the long term. I think we need to support them relocating to a different place, or different companies can buy them out, and I think that's what they're really hoping for.
Right.
And that's unfortunate because this is a place.
Right.
It's
an old community. Maybe not that old, but still an old community, and it's just going to be
right.
Just because there's no better option. I mean, you wouldn't want to live there, so buyout's probably your best solution in that situation.
It is it's terrible. Like
right.
It's a historic community. It's part of our Louisiana heritage. It's just they don't get a lot of airplay. People don't give them a lot of mind, I think, because they're African American. Right. But it's a loss to us all that towns like that are just kind of not considered, and it's not considered that these places are being made into toxic zones. So that's one thing.
Right.
I think the other thing is that the state is planning, because of all the problems with the coast and sea level rise from climate emissions that come from industrial projects like this.
Right.
There are, a few thousand people that are not going to be able to keep living in Lower Terrebonne Parish or St. Bernard, or, even in Orleans Parish, we have folks in Venetian Isles that are not going to be able to keep living there in 2045. There's too much water. And
right.
the state has this plan on where to put people, and that West Bank St. James is one of the places where it envisions putting people, but
everybody wants to leave, so...
Yeah. And no one really, if you go there, it is country. It is a big country. If you go in there on a nice day, it looks like a big sugarcane farm. It doesn't look too terribly out of place for
right.
rural Louisiana. But if you go in there on a bad day, you'll know that you do not want to move there.
Right.
And a lot of people in St. James are sick. Unfortunately, as an environmental group, we are limited in our ability to mobilize resources to help people with various issues. But at the very least, we've fought and won that the state has to develop an evacuation plan for folks.
It seems quite inadequate, right? But it's a victory. You're going to take what you can get, right? But
yeah.
So you kind of touched on something, and I'd like you to expand on it. So they're building the pipeline, and the pipeline, as they build it, they're going through Native American communities, and they're going to land in African American communities. What do you think is driving the choices of going after these kind of communities? It seems, with the Dakota Access Pipeline, they moved it from a white community into a Native American community. What's motivating motivating these choices?
Lowering costs, and they feel they can succeed.
It's cheaper to pursue through those communities than
yes.
And what would cause it to be cheaper?
Well, I mean, if you have a lot of people do not want this at all.
Exactly.
It's going through farmland. It destroys the land. It takes rice out of production. It takes crawfish out of production. It's a potential for pollution and hazardous waste. Exactly. You don't want it near you. So, I mean, most people are going to want to fight it. So they do put it in places next to folks who, because of the inequalities in our society, do not have the political power to fight. And they might not even, and they don't talk amongst each other either, right? The fishermen in the Atchafalaya Basin may not be, they're not talking to the African American folks in St. James, or not talking to the Native Americans.
So they don't have to pool their resources to fight together.
Right. So what we try to do is unite those folks to protect.
Build a network, right?
We build a network. That's true. And in this case, we've won some things. We've reduced the size of the pipeline by about 200 acres.
Okay.
We've gotten an evacuation plan for St. James.
Well, that's excellent.
But overall, it is distressing. A lot of people are distressed that it is being constructed. Right. We're going to fight for what's called better mitigation for those swamps. We're going to fight that they have to put some other swamps back.
Right.
So that struggle is still going on. That's a legal battle. It's going to go on for a few years. But, I think we stand in the way of this myth, this belief, supernatural belief, that the oil industry is always a unmitigated good for our people in Louisiana. So, and we find again and again that belief needs to be tested at every opportunity.
Well, so there's two things, right? There's the immediate impact of what they're doing and how that impacts the people immediately around them, right? And then there's the economy, how it affects our economy, which I think is where people. I think we're out of time, unfortunately. So we won't be able to cover all that. This went a lot faster than I did. Thank you for joining us, and tell them real quick, if you can, how they can get more information.
Oh yeah, you can check us out at healthygulf.org. That's our website, or on Facebook, we're Gulf Restoration Network. Beautiful.
I was trying to get to where we can give some upbeat stuff like that, but I'm wait, that's over.
Yeah.